Our habits are formed by how we inhabit our homes. If I don't get up in the morning and get my workout in, I know it impacts the rest of my day. And so for me, I've gotten to the point that that habit has actually created an inverse relationship that if I don't do it, I feel bad versus doing it, I feel good. Once you get to that point of where how you live just becomes daily habits, overall, you don't think of it as some sort of balanced structure of work and life.
Well, I'm very excited for the podcast today. We have Dr. G on with us. Welcome.
Thanks, Brad. Good to be here.
Yeah, so it's pretty rare that we get a doctor and a designer. We got dual functionality over here, and I think it's multi-layered. So Gautam Gulati, he is a serial entrepreneur, you're a designer, you're a public speaker, podcaster, founder of the Wellness Home. I mean, I think the list could keep going, but we probably want to get to the conversation. So without further ado, glad to have you on today.
Yeah, we can probably dig into some of those things, but as far as I know, I think I'm in the country's only doctor certified interior designer in combination. But it'll be a fun conversation. I'm excited about some of the work that you do as well in the intersection of real estate and health.
Well, one thing I know we're both passionate about, it's the wellness, living,
Mhm.
how that correlates not just in personal life, but business. But maybe we start there. I think it's pretty rare to have someone that is an expert in wellness. You mentioned, doctor and designer, which is kind of a rare combo. How do those two, intercept each other? How has that made a big impact for, this point in your career?
Well, I mean, philosophically, I've always believed that we need to create. I actually gave a TED talk in 2020, TEDx talk in 2012 or 2013, where it says we need to cultivate health artists, and talking about this notion of we need to look at health as almost like not just a pure science, but also an art. And how do we essentially craft experiences around health that promote health versus just treating diseases? So it's funny. I look back, of course, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, but that still resonates today. And of course, there's a series of experiences that happened throughout my career and throughout my life, which really brought me to this current junction. And really was the genesis behind creating the Well Home.
So walk us through the well home specifically.
Well, I like to say, some people say they're in the home improvement business. I like to say I'm in the health improvement business. But very specifically, we are design experts that are specialized in health, longevity, and well-being for the home and beyond. So we primarily focus on two different customer segments. One is the high net worth individuals where longevity has become of a primary interest, and they want these wellness amenities and features inside of their homes. So rather than going to the gyms or going to the spa, we bring some of that stuff into their homes, and we have 8 or 9 different categories and how we think about that. But then there's the other side of the business, which really stemmed from our personal experiences. That we design homes for people who are living with chronic health conditions, and oftentimes these chronic lifestyle diseases, um, where we can actually design our way into health. And so that can include anything from individuals with Alzheimer's, those struggling with migraines, asthma, COPD, even talking about aging in place. We have a growing aging population as well that we need to address.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of paths here because you mentioned if you don't mind me breaking it down, I think there's
Mhm.
three areas, right? You have definitely probably a wealthy class you're working with that is looking at, wellness and longevity and prolonging, wherever they are in their current life. You mentioned people that are dealing with either illness or disability or whatever it may be that is, trying to create a habitat for them where they can function day to day, maybe low stress and optimize to the best of their proficiency, right? And then additionally, aging in place, which I think is common. I think we probably overlap there too, where a lot of my clients are thinking, hey, this may be my last venture, my last project. I want to make sure that as the years go by, I can actually enjoy this investment and aging in place, whether it's wider hallways or,
Mhm.
backing behind the showers to put grab bars later that I may not need now, but years down the road. And so there's just different ways to look at each of these designs.
And what I love about your work, Brad, is that you don't look at it with sort of eye as if we're going to create this home for the individual to age in place, that it's going to end up looking like some sort of
Right.
geriatric facility down the road, right? I mean, the homes you build are
Right.
absolutely beautiful, and I think that's what they need to be. We need to actually create more products that are more beautiful to live in, and I don't feel like we've really done that just yet. And I think some people are starting to understand the need to do that. But as we spend more time in our homes, I mean, this is our biggest investment. It makes no sense to me that the place that we spend most of our money, we've never looked at from the lens of how is it impacting our health. And I think it's time that changes.
I think a side element to this too, if you don't mind me saying, Dr. G, one thing I've noticed too is that I found, especially since the pandemic, and maybe it's been the last 5 years overall, is there's something to be said. I mean, wellness is a big part of the discussion today, and how that impacts lifestyle. But there's something to be said about walking into a home that's designed right, that looks great, that, as you mentioned, there's something motivating, there's energy behind it, furniture that may be in correlation with the actual design itself. And what I've seen is, you and I think everybody to some extent, you're always going to have pushback on what's the square foot, what's the budget, how much am I spending, right? And I don't want to say very few, but there's a select amount of clients that are like, look, I can't take it with me. I want to invest in something that inspires me. And I've seen people that actually make the investment because it definitely is more of a luxurious, service, if you will, to have a designer and a high-end builder and create this amazing project. But the end result, you see people that are really happy and motivated. They come home, they wake up, how the architecture's laid out where to make sure they have sun in the morning. And, you know, if they go outside and they have indoor outdoor living and, have these amenities where they're just super inspired and, it makes them
Hmm.
happy. There's a client I have right now. And the reason I bring it up is he's like, Brad, and he did a fairly small house, especially in comparison to a lot of the homes I build. And he's like, Brad, like every morning I wake up and I'm just so happy, like living here. And so there's something to be said about that too.
Yeah, completely agree. It's funny. Healthy living is almost invisible, right? We only notice the things when we start experiencing issues with our bodies and our minds and things like that, and start raising it. But at the end of the day, we can design. They don't. I mean, yes, you can go all out in the design of these homes and have all of these incredible, expensive features that are part of it. But for the most part, it comes down to the basics of how we move, the lighting in the house, the direction that it's facing, the acoustics of the home, the smells that are in there, some of the layouts that are there. So it doesn't have to be this overcomplicated, super expensive design. Yes, you can put in, some of the luxuries of the infrared saunas and the plunge pools and the vitamin C showers and the, green living walls and so forth. But it's not requirement just to get some basic health inside the home. And I like to think that the best experiences of health are actually invisible. We don't even know that we're experiencing a healthy environment, right? So it's funny. I got asked several years ago, a good friend of mine who's was the chief Imagineer over at Disney.
Mhm.
We were just having a fun coffee conversation in the morning, and he was asking me. He goes, "Listen, if I were to give you one of our cruise ships, how would you reimagine the cruise ship to be a health and wellness experience without any one of our patrons knowing that it's a health and wellness experience?" And I thought it was a fascinating question because, I mean, ships are gluttony, they're partying, they're drinking. Yet, and the real interesting part of the question is, how do you make it so that they don't even know that they're doing that? And I think that the same thing when it comes to the construct of our homes, there are ways of creating healthy environments that can automatically create healthy behaviors without us even knowing that we're doing that. And isn't that the like to me, I think that's the best form of healthcare. When it becomes work, we're human beings. We're naturally going to try to avoid things and habits that require a lot of work or that'll drop off really quickly. But if there are, let's say, 60% of the things that we can do that we can just build into the experience of the home without anyone knowing it, I mean that's I think a huge plus for everyone, and it's not that expensive.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not, and
relatively.
yeah, relatively, and I think that's a valid point, Dr. G, because as you think about, I think Disney's an interesting case study because I think anyone that's familiar with the operation, if you say Disneyland or Disney Cruise, people associate cleanliness and good service, and right there's a level of care, things are in their place. There's something to be said about kind of that brand and mentality and ethos because for anyone that's traveled to different amusement parks, there's definitely other parks that have more exhilarating rides and more features, but there's something that draws people to the culture of that Disney product. And as you think about that in building, whether it be me as the builder or you as a designer, thinking about wellness and having things designed exactly where they should be, and cleanliness and organization, lack of clutter. I mean, these things make a huge impact on if in our working at our desk or working in our office, there's something to be said about something that's tidy in its place, that you're not dealing with these other distractions that impact you in a way you may not realize on a day-to-day basis.
Right, and back to your point about, some of your clients just feeling happy in those types of environments. I mean, I've had the chance to interact with a number of Disney executives, and what's fascinating is that when they think about solving their problems, they oftentimes start with, "What's the feeling that we want the customer to have?" Right? They're not looking at what's the function, what's it, typically in the design world, we start with how does it look or how does it function? And what I do typically in my design work, what I start with, how does it feel? How do you want it to feel? How do you personally want to feel coming out of it? And then let's reverse engineer and think about the things that we can incorporate to get you that feeling. So similarly, when you come out of Disney, I mean, they're basically creating these memorable feelings that you take, with your life and as a lifetime, as stories with your kids or your families or whatever that's scenario might be. And similarly, I think, as you described with some of the homes that you build, your clients are just happy. They don't know why, but they're coming out feeling energetic, revived. Vitality is one of the components that we look at in terms of incorporating design elements into the home. What's the feeling that you want to embody as the individual? We've all gone into environments that are, the white lights and it's really cold and it feels really sterile, and then we've got into environments that feel like it's home and you don't know why, but they just feel like this welcoming environment where it can reduce your cortisol levels. It feels calming based on the paints that are in the room, based on the air circulation that comes around, and you just don't know why, but you end up with this certain feeling, that's a result of some of these invisible designs, healthy designs that we can incorporate into the home.
So, what do you attribute? I mean, for you, Dr. J, I think it's very unique that you've had tremendous experience as a designer, tremendous experience in wellness. As you mentioned, you've consulted with, amazing companies around the country and around the world. How has that relationship grown over time? How have you built relationships to be consulting at companies such as Disney and have peers in that network?
Well, I think it's all. I mean, as you know, a lot of this is relationship driven. I think I'm a little bit lucky right now, where I'm basically an N of one. There's not many people that do what I do. I mean, there are people who do wellness related stuff. For the general categories, when you talk about biophilia, or you talk about outdoor spaces, or you talk about lighting, but when it really comes to bridging the science of medicine with our lived environment and lived spaces, I think there's very few people who actually do that. So word of mouth goes around, and luckily, I'm in a scenario where, as a public speaker as well, I get to interact and meet a lot of different folks. So, really, a lot of the interest has been inbound. I've been lucky for that, at least on the, as a design specialist and consultant for a variety of different organizations. And then, of course, on the chronic condition side of things, it's funny. I've spent my career, as an innovator inside of the world of healthcare. And healthcare tends to be an industry where it's like, well, we can't do this or we can't do that. It's an industry where you don't go fast and break things. You have to try to go fast and not kill anyone. And it's typically you go slow and don't kill anyone. So it's a very different approach when you go inside the world of healthcare. And so we took an angle where we actually work and partner on the real estate side of the business, and that as our entree or entryway into the homes of individuals who are needing some care. And so, um, that's been our approach. We're just now scratching the surface. If I were to sort of rattle off the entire vision of where we want to go with the well home, it'd probably take us this entire podcast in terms of the things that I can lay out. But very simply, I think we're just choosing, where most of our customers are having the greatest need, tackling those things first, and then we're going to build out some additional functionality around experiences, around different, accessory dwelling units. We'll probably get into the marketplace and retail space eventually. There's even a TV program that's being talked about. So lots of things that we can expand on. But I think our biggest challenge, I'm basically, as I meet all of these individuals who are also interested in the space, is how do I focus and where do I focus? And I think that's our biggest challenge.
I think it's fascinating because you mentioned the medical background, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm naive, but I feel like most of the doctors and medical professionals I dealt with, they're very analytical, very pragmatic, very practical. There's typically a different brain, when you're on the
Mhm.
creative side, anyone that's been around a creative as opposed to, maybe a numbers person. I mean, it's a little bit different, left side, right side of the brain. That's very unique that you have kind of both features there, how did your career lead you to the design aspect of things?
Well, again, I mean, looking in retrospect, I can connect the dots, but I had no idea what the journey and what the route was going to be. in hindsight, I can see it. But it's funny. I look back and I go through some of my old kids art stuff from my that my parents have collected, and I've always wanted to be an architect. And so I used to sit outside the home, and I would take my pad, and I would draw and sketch out our home, and it was this incredible. I ended up becoming a doctor, which I'm extremely grateful for. But what I've realized over the course of time is I love to design amazing experiences for people. And I love the way we design for feelings by basically creating a story out of how we live. And so ultimately, all I do is if I look at everything I've done in the business world, in the medical world, and we have an award-winning storytelling podcast as well called Superhumans, and the stuff I'm doing for the Well Home, all I'm doing is changing the lives of people's narratives from something that they're unsatisfied with today to something that's better into the future. And whether that be from the physical environment of the spaces that we live in, whether it be from the stories that we tell, whether it be through the innovations that we create, it's ultimately all about utilizing whatever skill sets that we have to craft a story to create a better narrative for the person at the end of the day. So it's funny. I look in hindsight and I can thread everything towards that passion and interest that I've always had. But I think creativity is just a part of it. I don't want to say there are creative people and non-creative people. I think
Right.
it's a practice, right? So I think as you build on certain things, you hone that skill just like anything else. It's a muscle.
Yeah, it is a muscle. And as you are exposed, as you mentioned, to different cultures and travel and, different events where you're meeting different people, like it all influences that creativity side.
I mean, I've,
As
I've
you're,
always had the
well,
belief, if we get into some of the philosophy of this, I've never agreed with the statement to follow your passion. I've always believed that you should follow your curiosity, and from your curiosity, you will ultimately discover your passion. And that's all I've done. I've just, things that I'm curious about, I just gravitate towards and I explore. And I think the difference between those who actually, make a difference or make an impact, or those who actually do things or willing to do things versus just sit back and pontificate over it. So that's all I've done. I've just been willing to take that extra step and try it.
that's a very interesting take because I don't think I've ever heard it put that way. So when you mentioned that you should follow your curiosity as opposed to your passion, if I'm understanding correctly, when you speak, maybe like you're in the medical field, there's a curiosity with design. And do you feel that that curiosity is what led to the passion, the drive to figure out that industry and now correlate the two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lifelong learner. I mean, I've got 4 graduate degrees. I got an MD, I have an MBA, I have an MPH, public health, and also a certification in interior design. And so for me, if I'm going to go deep into something, I'm going to learn it. And if I'm going to learn it, you might as well get a degree out of it. So, and it's just always been my stance. I think, my parents had always jokingly said that the one degree that I should have gotten but I missed was a JD, which I'm happy not to have. But um, it's it's I just I pursue what things that make me that I'm interested in. And I think the design world, the well home actually stemmed from a personal experience with my father who had Alzheimer's. But coming out of that, it was sort of accidental in terms of, well, there's a business opportunity here. And in order for me to understand the intersection of health and design and real estate, I knew real estate because we've done that growing up in my family, and we've invested in and done development projects for a number of years. But the design piece I didn't know as well. And it's one of those industries where you're either an insider or you're an outsider. And so for me, in order to truly make an impact in the space, I had to understand how the interior design worked. And so I got it certified as an interior designer, went through the training and the education and did all those projects and et cetera. And then applied that, adapted that into the concept of wellness versus just typical, your typical interior design around furnishings and aesthetics. So for me, that was, yeah, I mean, I think, I feel like I'm better off because I can speak the language in terms of how the industry operates, and I can work with other designers, not as an outsider, but as a peer.
So when you're, going back to the design element, and you mentioned, that personal experience with your dad with Alzheimer's, as you're looking at design when someone has chronic conditions, as you mentioned, it could be migraines, it could be something as, serious as Alzheimer's. And I've had some peers go through that, and it's a really tough thing, dealing with a parent going through Alzheimer's. How does that impact design? How does that impact, layout of the home to, be very receptive to that individual?
Well, I think the best way to really explain that is to just give the personal example of it. So, and what we did with my father when he moved in with me and having Alzheimer's. So, we're a family of medical doctors, including my father, who's a physician himself. And in 2012, he got diagnosed with a rapid form of Alzheimer's called Lewy body dementia, which is basically where your motor capacity deteriorates faster than your cognitive capacity. So you're kind of trapped in your own body. And so very quickly, my parents had to, they no longer could remain independent in their home. They moved into our home with my family. And we took care of him here. And, I thought we had it all under control in terms of, getting him the best medical care with the best specialists and physicians and treatments. But it turns out that that was not enough. And ultimately, what the healthcare system does, I mean, we don't really have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system.
Hmm.
And so what they do is they're just trying to solve the symptom, the puzzle that's there. And so every time he would get on a new strong medication, he would develop a new symptom. And then they would treat the new symptom with another medication. And ultimately, it got to the point where he was on like 12 medications at one time. And so I made the decision that we're basically going to, rethink this entire process. And that's when I actually came across and met, a family member of ours who gave me some of the best piece of advice that I'd ever heard. He said, the best thing that you need to do is to live in their reality. I was like, wow, it seems, live in their reality. What does that mean? And so I unpacked that. And it's basically meant you have to basically understand the world that they're experiencing from their condition, from the lens that they're, what their condition is doing to them. And so we took a step back and we ended up cutting off all of his medications and reintroduced them back in. But at the same time, we started doing things like, adjusting the lighting in his room, and the paint colors and the materials on his beds and the mattress temperatures and the room temperatures. That can impact, for example, a symptom called sundowning or agitation that commonly occurs in patients with Alzheimer's or dementia. We removed trip hazards. We created patterns in the homes that he could recognize. We put grab bars in areas that we knew that he was going to be into those in those patterns, and we made walk-in showers, and we utilized utensils that address the issues of tremors. We created a more communal eating area to make him feel more inclusive. We put digital trackers on him to track when he was going to be at flight risk or at fall risk. So all of these things we don't think about, right? And I had no place of going, and I was researching and looking things up and talking to other physicians, and nobody had answers around this. And so that was really eye opening to me in recognizing the fact that, our healthcare system abandons us where we need them the most. And that's when and it's where we're spending the most of our time, and that's inside of our homes. And so then I started getting asked, typically how anything starts. I started getting asked by a number of friends and family, peer members, and they're struggling with the same thing, being in the sandwich generation with the kids and taking care of the parents. And Alzheimer's and dementia, of course, is becoming a high prevalence, almost like an epidemic of it. But so all these questions not only applied to me, but applied to millions of others. And so we're trying to leverage these design elements that we've created and studied and researched, and prevent other people from having to suffer the way I did, or the way that my father did.
It's very commendable. I mean, not just um, to really take heart into understanding the condition and how your father's living, and try to create this surrounding and design and element for him, to be as successful as possible. But I think the sandwich generation is an interesting comment, because anyone that's running a business as you are, and you're building your enterprise and you're working and you have a family and you have kids, and there's a lot of responsibility. Balance is not, you often hear the term work-life balance, and a lot of us are like, well, there's, you kind of do the best you can. There's not really that much balance. You're just, you're doing the best you can, but trying to have a normal regimen and schedule, and an operation, if you will. And I know before we came online, you mentioned early morning you're at the gym. How do you balance just being, as you mentioned, sandwich generation? You have parents at home now. You have your family that has needs, and you have your business that has needs and personal needs. Because I think a really important comment that you touched on is, you're like, we're in a sick care system, not a healthcare, and so you're trying to do preventative maintenance,
Hmm.
from exercise and things, so that it's actually healthcare, not sick care, right? For you personally.
Yeah, and I should point out that my parents are no longer with me. My father passed in 2017,
Sorry.
but we still incorporate some of those features and elements in our home. For example, we've transformed our entire bedroom into what I call a sleep sanctuary. Some things require active participation on my part. For example, not drinking caffeine too late, or not,
Mhm.
eating certain types of food just before bedtime, and trying to keep a gap, and moving and keeping the technology away from the bed. I mean, those types of things require my input. But then there's other things, for example, like the lighting and the paint colors and the blackout curtains and the scents that are in the room. Those are invisible elements that essentially help um, improve my sleep, not just sleep duration, but sleep quality. And I can track it because I have an Aura ring here, which tells me exactly, how I'm doing. And so we can design perfect sleep. So for me, ultimately, what I'm trying to get at here is health is not a destination, it's a way of being. Let me repeat that again. Health is not a destination, it's a way of being. And so we have to actually build it into our lifestyle, right? And so that requires, I mean, I like to say, for example, our habits are formed by how we inhabit our homes. And so there are simple lifestyle and habit tweaks that you can do inside your home, which very simply promote health versus create sickness, right? So I'll give you some other little simple tweaks. Um, that I incorporate, which helps me, on a daily basis, create this sort of what you're talking about, work life health balance on a daily basis. So, for example, like even around, so we have a little, home gym in our basement, and what I do is to reduce the friction between me and getting on that Peloton bike or hitting the weights. Is I have a towel ready, I have water ready, I have the music speakers ready, I have everything ready to go. So all I have to do is just show up, right? Oftentimes we'll basically convince ourselves, if you put too much time and friction between it, saying, oh, I got to get my shoes, or I don't know where I put my workout clothes are, or I got to go fill up my water bottle, whatever it might be. Those are just levels of resistance and friction that prevent you and are trying to convince you to say, don't do it, right? So very simple habits that you can create around the house. Same thing can go for healthy foods. The way you organize your pantry, the way you organize some of the appliances inside your kitchen, like you might be more incented, or have a better desire to want to cook rather than order in. If you make it more desirable, more fun, more connected. So those little things that you can do that make a healthy lifestyle a way of being versus something that you have to do every day. So build it into the construct of how you live. I like to say you're a product of the environment you keep. So literally, if you're keeping a bad environment, whether it be the people that you're hanging out with or the environment that you're living with, you're going to turn into that. And so, if your environment is helpful, the people that you're hanging with are healthy, not helpful, but healthy. You too are going to be healthy. And so, it's a way of being. And if you could think about it that way versus this task that I have to do, this burden that I have to live with every single day, I think it becomes much more manageable. And then over time, like anything, you get used to it. And then once you get used to it, doing the bad things, feel worse. Like if I get up, and we were talking about before, if I don't get up in the morning and get my workout in, I know it impacts the rest of my day. And so for me, I've gotten to the point that that habit has actually created an inverse relationship, that if I don't do it, I feel bad, versus doing it, I feel good. Once you get to that point of where how you live just becomes daily habits, I think overall you don't think of it as some sort of balanced structure of work and life.
I think it's pretty powerful because to repeat it, I mean, you repeated this twice for us. You said habits are formed by how we inhabit our home, and there's a few examples you gave personally. How you're operating, Dr. G, and I think it's interesting because as I applied that to me personally, there's something to be said about, um, one, when you're thinking about food and nutrition, if I buy certain things that I don't want to eat, but they're in the house, you're going to eat them, right? So that's part of it, how you're creating that. I think food prep is really important. For me, I'm really busy, and I found that,
Yeah.
hey, if I'm food prepping for the week and I find time when I have time, maybe on the weekend, and you're preparing some dishes that are healthy, it's a lot easier because when you're hungry at the moment, you're going to find something that's quick and easy, and typically that's not going to be the most healthy thing. You're not going to time. And I think the gym's interesting because you and I typically try to work out early morning and start the day. There's something to that. And I found that the nights where I just go to bed, as opposed to the nights where maybe you're preparing, protein shake in the morning and you have your clothes lined out and you mentioned the Peloton bike, your shoes are there. There's something to be said. It's a lot more, or in my opinion, it's easier to wake up in the morning when you're prepared for the day as opposed to, do I
Hmm.
really want to get out of bed and I still got to go make this and find my shoes and get dressed and then get out the door? And you're like, oh, I'd rather just hit snooze and, lay back down.
Yeah, and I think the way I mean, I'm sure the way you guys approach things as well is like when you look at each room, you got to look at it with intention, right? So it's not just I want the Sub-Zero fridge and I want the the Viking cooktop, or you have to sort of think about like what. So I like to do this exercise called life in reverse, and I ask all of my clients to think about their life in reverse. And what that basically means, it says think about the last decade of your life, and then write a diary of all the activities and things that you're doing in the last decade. And that last decade could be any decade for anybody. It could be um, 110 to 120. It could be 90 to 100. It could be 80 to 90. It's different for every individual. So whatever activities that you want to do, and then let's reverse engineer and figure out how do we design that construct into your life to the best we can relative to your home. And so, for example, with things like, when you look at a home gym, it's not just about having the weights and having the mats and having the bike and rower. It's about designing that gym with intention, like we talked about those friction points and understanding where the points of friction are for that particular client or that particular customer or home buyer. And then reverse engineering, how do you reduce those friction points? So if it's a matter of like I just can't get up in the morning, or it's because my water is never there, like do you want to put in a water filter into that movement, what I call a movement studio, and make it as easy as possible? Are the things, for example, putting in a towel warmer or a towel dryer? I mean, so there are all these different functions that you can look at to reduce the points of friction that promote healthy behaviors to make it a way of being. Same thing with kitchen. We talked about food prep being an issue. So the issue with a lot of people actually wanting to cook at home oftentimes is related to, well, food prep is just such a pain in the ass, right? It's like I gotta chop things, I gotta run, my trash cans all the way on the other side of the kitchen, and then I gotta dump stuff there, and then I gotta do the dishes. And so if you can figure out, like, if that's what's holding you back from making healthy meals, because we know that if you make healthy meals, and oftentimes your kids are going to see it, or your family members are going to see it. Like we talked about, you're a product of the environment you keep. So those little changes over time compound. And so therefore, it's not just about making healthier food or reducing food prep friction, but you're now having this long-term impact where your kids see you doing it. They're eating healthier food. They get better habits. And so when they go out and experience, the world in their lens, they're going to want to do that same thing. And so it has a lot more implications than we tend to want to believe. But it's oftentimes those very little things, those subtle changes inside the home from a design standpoint, that can make the difference between health being a burden, to health being something that we value and do every day.
Yeah,
How do you,
and
how,
as you're giving that, go
I'm,
ahead.
I'm curious, Brad, how do you approach this stuff? I'm sure your clients oftentimes ask, we're trying to be healthy. We want some wellness stuff. Like, what are some lenses or ways that you guys approach from the home building perspective? I mean, do you look at mostly like materials and lighting and sound quality, or do you get into the nitty gritty of, um, we're trying to get eat healthier and move healthier and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. That's a really good question. So I think from just a building perspective, which we align and we can for the discussion here is, you have brands such as Delos. I know you're very familiar with that. You have circadian rhythm lighting. I think it's become very apparent here that from air filtration, off gassing, water filtration, these are things that my clients are asking. In fact, I've had a few clients recently that get very specific as far as the chemicals of the paint that we're putting in the home, and they want to know the furniture that's going in the home, because that off gas is a real thing, and they're really looking at
Hmm.
we're building homes tighter as we should, um, and and so with that, there's you have to make sure that that environment, and of course we have fresh air intakes because you have to keep that healthy air, and then how are we monitoring that? So that's a big part. And I think your early example, just truth be told, I'm not a designer. I'm not an interior designer. I'm not claiming to be one. But where I've seen my designers, similar to you, Dr. G, is like I've seen where, as you think about that balance in a home, I know a lot of designers that'll tell their clients as they're working on that first round before they get into heavy design, they tell their clients in your current house, your current living situation, don't have your cleaner come, don't pick up, just live 2 weeks in your house. Where are you dropping your
Mm,
backpack? Where are you putting your shoes? As I come into
yeah.
the house, I want to come in 2 weeks where it's not clean. I want to see where everything's getting, where you dropping your mail and your keys. And really they want to see their closet and, how are you operating? And that really helps them understand, going back to the wellness side, is that you're kind of factoring in not just the healthy aspect, but you're also trying to factor in that balance and creativity. So it's not just, this beautiful Sub-Zero fridge, but there's actually intent behind how things are laid out from the minute you come in the door to you go down for the night in your bedroom.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. It's, it really is, I like that I like to think of that as sort of experiential design, right? Like that I love that notion of just going and observing for a couple of weeks how you live, and I think that is probably some of the best piece of advice from any designer's perspective is go live there, see how you move around. I mean, we did that. We made an addition to our house, which one of our favorite spots is Wyoming, and so we love the
Mhm.
outdoors. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up observing how we entertain and live in our home, and then we ended up building an addition specifically to how we function as this addition would go into our home. It's sort of this indoor outdoor experience and how we have the circulation, not just from entertainment, but it's also kind of an escape in our own home, like almost like a cabin escape. But again, that was kind of experiential design. We didn't rush into it. We said, how do we move about? How do we observe? And how do we build that into the experience that we ultimately want to gain the best most out of.
So as you mentioned this early on too, you spoke vitamin C showers, and so maybe explain a vitamin C shower. You said green walls. Some of these are luxury items. Infrared sauna. How has that played a role in design as technology's increased and now people have the cold plunge? They have the sauna, they have these elements that they're bringing into their personal property.
Well, I think oftentimes I engage in a discussion with my clients in terms of what's the science behind some of these technologies, if we want to call them technologies. But um, you know, it sounds great. Vitamin C shower, the cold plunge, the infrared sauna, and they feel good too once you're in it. But what's the real science behind it? And so if we geek out a little bit, there's actually research that's showing, there's some great research coming out about epigenetics and how our epigenetics essentially informs the expression of our genes. And our epigenetics essentially think of it as kind of like the operating system of your body. And so we can change different elements of the operating system based on the different proteins that we produce. And so without getting too scientific here, but when we talk about HIT therapy, right? High intensity interval training, or we talk about contrast therapy of like going from the sauna to the plunge pool. These are basically scenarios that create micro stressors on your body, and there's good stress and bad stress, right? So micro stressing, or for a short period of time, oftentimes can have beneficial benefits to your body. Um, and if you do it for a long period of time, obviously, you can put chronic stress on your body, which is never a good thing. And so, there's science that shows, for example, that if you do, roughly 20 minutes of a sauna followed by 4 minutes of a plunge pool or a cold shower, that you have a release of what's called sirtuins in your body, which are the proteins for DNA repair mechanisms, which are associated with longevity. Sorry, that's a mouthful, I know, but ultimately, what I'm getting at here is that the things that we recommend, we first want to understand, what are you trying to achieve, right? So vitamin C shower, for example, or well, let's just take the plunge pool. People think that you have to be in this ice cold bath. Actually, the science only shows that you need to be roughly around 54 degrees in order to get the full benefits from it. Anything below that, beyond extreme, you're not getting that much of an additional gain off of that. Anything above 6 minutes in a cold plunge is actually detrimental because you're putting chronic stress on your body. So there's a window where it's actually healthy for you from in terms of both lifespan and health span. The vitamin C shower, for example, is a good alternative for those who don't want a plunge pool inside their home, but they want the complete sauna inside, but they don't want the plunge pool inside. So you want to go back and forth really quickly. You don't want to go from the sauna and then have to go out to the out backyard and go into the plunge pool. So a vitamin C shower with a high pressurized vitamin C shower is a good alternative where you can actually drop it so that they have a colder temperature that drops below 54. You get it pressurized and you put these little filter cartridges of vitamin C that basically are good for your skin, good for your hair, good for all the other elements of your body as you shower. So those are just interesting luxuries that some families can afford to put inside their homes. But again, part of what we do is help them understand what are the true health benefits and how that works and why we recommend. And same thing with the sauna, right? You have everything from infrared. There are different types of infrared saunas. You have traditional saunas. You have, salt, Himalayan salt saunas, etc. So there's different types of benefits depending on what you're looking to achieve.
Personally, and I know it varies by every individual, what are some of your preferences individually? If you're designing your dream home, what are some of those key elements? If can't say money's not an object, but I mean, if there's things you're willing to invest in, what would those be?
I mean, I think some of the things that you talked about for sure are sort of par for play for me. Like having clean air, I think is one of those invisible things that you don't think about, but certainly impacts us from an energy, sometimes fatigue. If you have pollutants that come through, our windows and oftentimes our doors are, they're getting seeped in by all these sort of toxins. I think air quality is probably one of my most primary ones that I look at. But I'll tell you. So I kind of and then water, of course. I mean, there's a whole host of materials that we look at that are non-toxic, low VOCs or no VOCs. Those types of invisible things I think are the most important from a health perspective. But then there are those that are more prominent and visible. For example, like a sauna or a plunge pool. But for me, I would divide it up into 8 categories, and these are actually the 8 categories that we designed for because I've narrowed down the things that I think are more optimal in a home. One is I think sleep is the most underrated but most important element of our health. And you can eat healthy, you can exercise, but if you don't get good sleep, it's almost a moot point. So I think designing for good quality sleep is super, super important. So a sleep sanctuary is number one. A rest and recovery suite would probably be another one, which is the components of having some sort of infrared or hot area and a cold area. It could be in the form of a shower. I'm not a huge plunge pool person, but I wouldn't mind a vitamin C shower. And then there's a movement studio. Of course, the home gym for me is extremely important. There's a wellness kitchen. So having basically, like we talked about, reducing the friction to make it more enjoyable and desirable to actually want to cook and eat healthier foods. A smart health bathroom. So I think we spend a lot of our time. It's a great source of being able to capture our vitals and some of our health metrics as we're inside of our main bathroom. Um, Safety and hygiene is another important one, which I talked about in terms of air. I look at that in terms of air quality and water quality, and also the hygiene around our home in terms of reducing toxins. And another one that's really interesting that I think is becoming more popularized as we build it out is what I call the social speakeasy. Um, and so a social speakeasy basically addresses the element of connection. And so you've probably seen some of the studies by Vivek Murthy, who's our the Surgeon General, talking about the loneliness epidemic.
Hmm.
And as we're spending more of our time on technologies, we're more separated from other people. And I think designing intentional spaces inside of the home that are specifically designed for gathering and community are becoming more and more important, besides just the living room, right? So a social speakeasy, yeah, you don't have to have alcohol in it. You can have your smoothies or you can have whatever you want at, behind the bar over there. But it can be a place where it's a tech-free zone. You can maybe put on some nice vinyl and listen to some records with a good sound system, more subdued lighting, more comfortable furniture. You can invite your friends over. Maybe you have a chess board or a chess table inside there, but it's basically an intentional space of the home that is designed specifically for connection and community. And I think a lot of people are lacking that. And I think, if you look at the science, loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it has that much of an impact on our bodies. And so it seems like a light matter, but it's extremely important that we figure out how to design these, not just in our communities, but also inside of our homes.
Well, you're seeing that in great effect, not just from the pandemic, but you're seeing, businesses that are, working remote. And so you're not having as much of that office, maybe interaction or normal interaction as you normally would.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Now
mean,
looking, okay.
it doesn't have to be, going out to dinner every week and meeting tons of friends. It can just be, having the neighbors over and just enjoying some quiet time or having the children inside the room and playing game time without televisions and without the phones ringing and so forth. So it's nice, this little tucked away secret spot of the home where you now is dedicated and that it's basically the sacred spot of where we connect and where we chat and where we communicate that's tech free. Um, and I think that does wonders in terms of your biology.
What I love about this conversation with you, Dr. G, is, I think a lot of businesses, and I know we have a lot of listeners that are entrepreneurs, or they may own an architecture firm or design firm or a construction company. And, there's kind of these touch points in your business, as you think about the ideal client and marketing where um, you're always trying to elevate the brand to some extent, right? And trying to understand some of the options that are out there. And, as you're elevating that brand. And, there's always a point where you're going to have clients that come in and of course hey, they want the most square footage for the cheapest price. I mean, that's just the reality of, they're looking at it pure investment, don't want to overbuild, whatever it may be. There's something to be said as you've built a brand, as you have, about this wellness, right? About, being a thought leader in the industry, how well versed and connected you are, and how you have personal application, as you mentioned with your father. And, you break down these 8 categories so eloquently as you did here. And, for you with the public speaking and, you active in the podcast forum and, um, there's something to be said about this brand that you're creating with these wellness, where you're going to now attract clients that align with you, that listen to this and say, that's really who I want design in my home. They understand. And so, whether it's intentional or not, you are, by becoming a thought leader and so passionate about following this curiosity, right, as you laid out, that I would imagine, how has that impacted that lead generation, the clients that are reaching out, the business development arm of who you are today?
Well, we're not trying what's interesting about the space that we're carving out is we're not trying to compete with anyone. We're
Yeah.
basically a new layer inside that we're gonna partner with architects, we're gonna partner with builders, we're gonna partner, with, interior designers, as being sort of that sort of voice of wellness that we can inject into the experience of the home building process. I don't think we're there yet where it's basically a standalone option just yet. So we work and partner, with construction companies and builders such as yourselves and some others. And when your clients are looking for specifically for some of these wellness elements, rather than just provide guesswork in terms of here are some things that we think might happen, put some intention around it. And so just a quick consultation around, what are some materials, technologies, way to think about this that we didn't think about before. Um, as you're getting into even just the renderings of the home and laying out the experience of the home, and then even getting into, so even from the architectural standpoint, then from the build standpoint, are there certain materials that we can deploy that would have a less of a toxic impact on the body, and then from the design standpoint, are there certain technologies, tools, appliances, things that we can incorporate that ultimately could impact as well. So it really plays across the spectrum of the entire build team, and we're just sort of an added layer to give that wellness, scientific wellness expertise as part of that equation. And something you said, which has always interested me, people oftentimes think that wellness is super expensive, and what I like to say
Hmm.
to that is, if you think wellness is expensive, think about illness. Right?
Right.
Illness
Yeah.
is way more expensive than wellness, and that, as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth way more than is that right? I always get these wrong. An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure.
Hmm.
Basically speaking, that if you can get ahead of it now, it'll save you significant dollars in the long run. And not to mention, by the way, these, from a valuation standpoint, having wellness amenities and features in your home command a 15 to 30% premium on your home. I mean, it ranges depending on what you have,
Hmm.
but it's not just good for your body; it's good for your wallet.
I love that you brought this up because all of us are very familiar. I mean, anyone that's had medical bills, been in the healthcare system, despite insurance you have, it is extremely costly. And that investment, as you're focusing on the sick care, just the cure itself, if you have opportunities where instead you're investing in yourself, as you mentioned, you're investing in your house that can add value to the home, and invest in your personal health, which can make huge impacts, especially if you understand genetics and maybe something that you're more prone to individually because of your heritage and your family. Um, it doesn't make it seem so consequential to invest in some of these healthy elements in these categories that you just brought to our attention.
Yeah, I agree. Is there a question? Was there a question in there? Because
No, I
I can.
mean, no, there wasn't. I think it's just it was a point I wanted to hit home because um, really where I'm going is, this goes back to my original point about the ideal client, is that a lot of us are trying, there's something to be said about confidence, right? As you understand your business, as you understand your brand, as you understand the product and essentially what you're putting out there, there's something about confidence that anyone listening be like, when a client pushes back and the first thing they want to value engineer is maybe the Dalo system or the air filtration or, the VOC monitors, or you mentioned, the cold plunge. I mean, it's a lot easier to have that conversation when you understand the risks involved and the potential for
Mm.
um, whether it's in health element or resale. As we become more versed in this, it's a lot easier to kind of handle those tough conversations and maybe look at something else that's not as important as you mentioned. Maybe we don't need not to disparage, any of my vendors, but maybe this fancy cabinetry or this range, or maybe, you know, um, you know, whatever we're putting on the exterior facade of the house. There's certain things where we may want to focus our money, and it's up to us as professionals to help guide the client accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, historically, the industry has never really focused on the health and well-being of their clientele, right? The real estate industry. And
Yeah.
so this it's a little shift in perspective here. And I think that every builder should ask their customers, are there any health elements or perspectives that we need to be aware of? But you don't want to get too, personal in terms of their lives, but just generally just curious, are there any health perspectives or things that we should be aware of or that you're looking to achieve down the road? This is why I do that life in reverse perspective, because it's really eye-opening to them when they start thinking about that. They're like, oh, I haven't thought about what my plan is to get there and how my home can actually help me get there, right? So if you throw out some of the statistics, for example, when I give a lot of talks, I ask people, I was like, how many people know of somebody who's living with a chronic health condition? And almost 100% of the hands go up in the room. And it's no surprise because with our aging population, we have from some of the stats that are out there, there's roughly 65% of the adult population is living with one or more health condition, and of that, two
Hmm.
or more. Right? We've invented this whole notion of polypathology, having living with multiple chronic conditions. 100 years ago, the average lifespan was 40. Right, we've doubled that in the span of 100 years. In the whole, if you look at the past 100,000 years, it's this little blip in time. And so, aging and longevity is really a relatively new concept. So it's no surprise that we've actually haven't factored this into how are we actually baking it into our design experience. Um, and so, as we think about um, the crisis of aging that's happening in our populations, I mean, every single person is essentially going to encounter some sort of health experience. So why aren't we asking them that if this is your home, this is where you're going to spend the majority, a big bulk of your money? Why aren't you looking at it for a little small amount, looking at it through the lens of whatever conditions you have or may have down the road? And then let's factor that into the design, because it's easier to do it now than it is to retroactively do it later.
Yeah, and as a builder, it's interesting you bring that up because yeah, for some reason in construction, you know, maybe a little bit in design architecture, definitely more us builders are definitely the offender here. We're very slow to transition to whether it be new technology or automation or products, wellness, whatever it may be. It's very easy to get in this pattern of, well, this is how I've done it forever. And you kind of get in these patterns. And it's something that as builders we fight, with our subcontractor base, we fight to some extent. And so as you're seeing more understanding from a building and just a building science perspective that, hey, there's ways to build a home that are more sustainable and less water intrusion, which leads to less mold and other elements. And so you can build a home that's actually better for sustainability and using solar and all these different elements. But then even taking it a further step with the wellness side, this is why I'm super excited about this call today, this podcast with you, Dr. G's, because you're such an expert in this field. And it just essentially is creating avenues where we can separate ourselves from the competition. You mentioned that you're not even looking at the competition, you're creating a whole new, you know, company and business in a field that is needed. And you see the industry going this way, and you're trailblazing that path for us.
Yeah, and I think, well, thank you for that. And I think being sort of a leader and a pioneer in the space oftentimes comes with its own hurdles and challenges, right? And so we're trying to figure
Mhm.
out, in working with builders and architects, such as yourself, and how do we reduce, just like we look at our health perspective, how do we reduce that friction? Because we know that there are certain ways that you've done it and it's worked that way. And why, if something's not broken, why try to fix it, right? So what we're trying to do is basically create a methodology, and we're still, if anyone's listening or yourself or anyone else wants to, experiment with me on this, we're trying to find the easiest ways to be able to get those wellness oriented design elements in sort of your repertoire of what you can offer as kind of a premium upgrade for your clientele. So it's almost like ready to go. Here are the things. You don't even have to think twice about it. And we bake that into your ongoing experience of how you build homes going forward without you having to do the extra work for it. So that's how I feel like we'll address the issue with builders trying to, not not trying to adjust their entire process or reinvent their entire process, but sort of again bake it into the way you're doing things, and then give you the entire blueprint so that you don't even have to do anything for that. We do the work for you, and then you just implement it however you need to, and mark it up how you need
So what keeps you up at night right now?
to. My kids? No. The I don't know. I'm for me, it's I think it's the future. I feel like we're going backwards in terms of, if you look at, I like to classify sort of these categories in health very simply, where we can move the needle, right? When it comes to nutrition, movement, sleep, connection, mindfulness. I feel like in every one of those categories, we're moving backwards. Um, so, for example, when it comes to um, sleep, right? We're creating environments that are more toxic, worse air quality. We're staying up later. We're drinking out more. I mean, we're doing everything the antithesis of what would be good sleep. When it comes to the kitchen, we're making things lazier. DoorDash or order delivery. The convenience oftentimes trumps anything healthy that goes into your body. When it comes to movement, we're being more sedentary. We're sitting in place. We're on the computer more. We're not walking outside as much. We're have less sidewalks or movable areas or bike paths. When it comes to mindfulness and connection, technology is destroying that. And so that's what keeps me up at night. It's kind of like, how are we going to reverse that? I spent my career trying to do that. Um, and so I think the well home is probably just another tool, another way to be able to do that. But I firmly believe that health begins in the home. And so for me, what keeps me up at night is trying to figure out what are the right ways that we can address that.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Um, what's some of the best advice you've been giving?
Oh man, I'll tell you what. So I'll give you a piece of advice that I've gleaned over the course of having interviewed and interacted with, I don't know, 500,000 different celebrities, influencers, experts, leaders, and I look for patterns. As someone who I spent my career as an innovation executive, and so as it's sort of natural for me to always look for patterns in the world. And so the number one pattern that I notice, which I think is sort of indirect advice, if I were to take it from all the people that I've spoken to and interacted with, is it's basically this observation that really nobody knows what the hell they're doing. And if you think about
Yeah.
that, it makes it less scary. It doesn't matter if
Mhm.
you're Oprah or you name it. Most people will basically admit that they don't know what the hell they're doing. The difference between what makes them good or successful versus those who are not is that they're willing to take action. And so if you basically, oftentimes we don't do things because we're fearful of when a failure or the outcome or so forth. Um, and that basically paralyzes us, right? And so, uh, oftentimes I think, if you just realize that nobody really knows what the hell they're doing, it reduces the element of that layer of fear, and then just take action. And that's how people win. We always hear, if you look at the cover of Inc. magazine or Architectural Digest, you always see the successes, but you don't see the buildup of failures over the course of time that it took to get to that level. And I think that's really the biggest piece of advice that I've observed.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of truth in that statement. So as I want to be conscious of your time as we get to the finish line here, Dr. G, and you've been phenomenal. I mean, it's hard to believe sometimes you have a guest on here like how this already be an hour. So with that said, what do you do for fun and anything that's upcoming and exciting for you?
Oh man, I'm an outdoors person. I love hiking. I love being outside as much as possible, spending that time with the kids. We love going, mountain climbing if we can, out into the Rockies, or we're just out in Banff. Big traveler, love traveling. Those are my big loves. I mean, I play some sports here and there, just to keep moving, and but I think another big passion is, just like I said before, pursuing what makes me curious. And so if there's something that I love, and I'll pursue it and follow it until it doesn't interest me, and I'll move on to something else. If it does interest me, I'll double down and keep doing it.
That's incredible. Well, for those listening, Dr. G, that want to reach out and continue the conversation or, even consult with you for your services, where can they find you?
Well, the website's probably the easiest. If you're looking for the Well Home services, it's www.thewellhome, but it's .me. So if you spell it out, the Well Home, it's .me, or you can go to thewellhome.co as well, and it'll direct you there. So that's everything. The Well Home, my contact information is there as well. On Instagram and LinkedIn, I'm at Dr. Gautam Gulati, DrGautamGulati. And for my speaking stuff, I have a speaker site called imdrg.com. You can find out everything about my innovation practices over there.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough, Dr. G. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. This has been a lot of fun.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.